Hello and welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine live on Channels Television. I'm Listen to walk out first the headlines. Ukraine ends mission to defend Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. Putin backs down hardline on Sweden. Finland bids to join NATO. Sweden signs application for NATO membership. Once again, the force hold-up in the last Ukrainian stronghold in the besieged port of Mariupol began evacuating yesterday, appearing to cede control of the city to Russia after months of bombardment. In an early morning address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the country needed its heroes alive and thanked the Ukrainian military and negotiators, the International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations. 5 buses carrying troops from the Azovstal steelworks arrived in the Russian-controlled town of Azovstal late yesterday, with some of the evacuated troops wounded and carried out of the buses on stretchers. The Ukrainian regiment at the steel plant said it was fulfilling orders to save the lives of troops by evacuating them.
As regards the situation in Mariupol, thanks to the actions of the Ukrainian military, Armed Forces of Ukraine, Intelligence Negotiating Group, the International Community of the Red Cross and the United Nations, we hope that we will be able to save the lives of our guys. There are severely wounded ones among them. They are given care. I want to stress out, Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive. That's our principle. I think that any adequate person will understand these words. The operation to save the defenders of Mariupol has been started by our military intelligence. The work continues to return guys home, and this work requires delicacy and time. The main intelligence directorates of the Ministry of Defense, Armed Forces of Ukraine, National Guard, the Border Guard Service have jointly launched the operation to save the defenders of Mariupol, blocked in the territory of Azovstal plant on 16th May. 53 heavily wounded persons were evacuated from Azovstal to a medical facility in Novosk to provide medical care. 211 persons more, through a humanitarian corridor, were transferred to Olenivka for further return home. This exchange process will be carried out.
President Volodymyr Zelensky there. Similarly, the Ukrainian military has lauded the Ukrainian fighters who defended the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged southern city of Mariupol, calling them heroes of our time and that they will be remembered forever in history. Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces said the last stand in Mariupol gave Ukraine the opportunity to prepare and create the defensive frontiers in which the troops are still present today and give a decent counterpoint to the aggressor. According to him, we got the critically needed time to build reserves, regroup forces, and get help from partners. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister has said that an exchange would be worked out for the fighters evacuated from the steel plant who have been taken to Russian-held territory. Anna Malia said in the early hours of today that 53 seriously wounded fighters were taken from the Azovstal steelworks to a hospital in the Russian-held city, which is in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. An additional 211 fighters were evacuated to Olenivka, also in Russian-held Donetsk, through a humanitarian corridor. Malia said in a video posted on social media that all the evacuees are to be subject to an exchange without providing further details. The General Staff of the Ukrainian military said that Russia had fired artillery across the border. Dmitry Zevitsky, head of the Sumy region military administration, said Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups had tried to cross the border. According to him, there was a very serious battle. Mortars, grenade launchers, small arms were used. 5 Russian missiles struck civilian targets in the city of Oktarka, injuring at least 5 people, he said via Telegram. He added many houses were affected, as well as a church and kindergarten. Ukraine's Air Force has said that its air defense shot down 3 cruise missiles in the Lviv region. In a post via social media, the Air Force said at midnight, May 17, the enemy launched a missile strike on the infrastructure of the Lviv region. 3 cruise missiles were destroyed by air defense units of the West Air Command, according to reports. They attacked the Lviv region from the southeast with naval cruise missiles. Powerful blasts had been heard at the same time in Lviv, with the region's governor having said that it seemed the air defenses had done their job. And regional governor in Russia's Kursk region, Roman Stavrot, said a village in Russia's western province bordering Ukraine came under Ukrainian fire today, but there were no injuries, although 3 houses and a school were hit. The governor wrote in Telegram that the Russian border guards returned fire to quell the shooting from large caliber weapons on the border village of Alexeyevka. Well, Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, appeared to climb down from Russia's objections to Sweden and Finland joining NATO, saying Moscow had no issues with them entering the US-led military alliance. The comments appeared to mark a major shift in rhetoric. Moscow for decades has cast NATO expansion as a direct threat to Russia's security, including citing it as a justification for the invasion of Ukraine itself. Russia's invasion has shaken up Europe's security architecture and forced Sweden and Finland to choose sides after staying out of NATO during the Cold War. Finland and Sweden now say they want the protection offered by NATO's treaty, under which an attack on any member is an attack on all. Swedish and Finnish officials have said Putin has only himself to blame for their decisions to join NATO, but the plans might be hitting a snag.
I want to inform you, dear colleagues, that Russia has no problem with those states. It hasn't. So in this regard, expansion by the addition of those countries poses no direct threat for us. But the expansion of military infrastructure into this territory would certainly provoke our response. What that will be, we will see what threats are created for us.
Our 200-year-long standing policy of military non-alignment has served Sweden well. But the issue at hand is whether military non-alignment will keep serving as well. And Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is not only illegal and indefensible, it also undermines the European security order that Sweden builds its security on.
Kardeşlerimizin kıtanın kuzeyi ve Sahel bölgesi başta olmak üzere pazartesi günü Türkiye'ye geleceklermiş.
Sweden's Foreign Minister Ann Linde signed an application declaring the country wants to join NATO. The move marks a formal step by Stockholm towards joining the US-led military alliance, ending decades of military neutrality as Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparks a dramatic evolution in European security and geopolitics. Well, she said it feels very big, very serious, and it feels like we have arrived at a conclusion which is the best for Sweden. According to her, we don't know how long it will take, but we calculate that it could take up to a year. Now this week, this application will be submitted together with Finland in a day or so, and then it will be processed by NATO. Norway, Denmark and Iceland, in a joint statement, said they stand ready to support NATO applicants, Finland and Sweden, in the case the 2 Nordic nations were to come under attack. Norway's Prime Minister told a news conference in Oslo that Norway would stand ready to assist the 2 countries if their territories are attacked before they become full NATO members. Turkey surprised its NATO allies by saying it would not view applications by Finland and Sweden positively, mainly citing their history of hosting members of Kurdish militant groups. But what strategies are being deployed in this war? So many things happening today. Well, joining us is Ambassador Roy Okidibie, security analyst. He's a member of security professional bodies with over 26 years military special forces. Is retired with graduate experience, fellow of the International Institute of Professional Security. He's also a certified protection officer, USA, a chartered mediator, conciliator, member of the International Facility Managers Association. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much. It is always a pleasure.
First, what's your reaction to the evacuation of Ukrainian fighters from the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, which is the latest happening from yesterday up to this morning? Ukraine's defense ministry says over 200 fighters left there, and they were taken to areas held by Russian-backed rebels. Many have wondered, I mean, this is still a war. Is it safe for them to go to places held by Russian-backed rebels?
Well, you know, the position of the world towards the Ukraine war with Russia is of sympathy. Everybody has come out to quickly condemn the actions of Russia. And if you take the statistics of those that are for or against, you will see that Ukraine has a lot of global sympathy. Now, any form of strategy that is being deployed right now, the proper perspective cannot be adequately explored because there is a lot of propaganda news. Even in Nigeria, you can also see that in any small violence that crops up. So the UK, the US, they are building up propaganda news, propaganda war. The Russians are building up propaganda news, propaganda war. So all we know right now is that the strategies being deployed in Ukraine is to create more sympathy and to garner more sympathy from global interest groups, especially those that are members of NATO that are trying to prove a point to show that the aggressor is a villain.
And do you think this is working in whose favor now? Ukraine's favor? Are they winning the war, or against Russia?
Well, with the recent activities in Sweden, you begin to understand that it's moving towards Ukraine's favor. And globally, other countries have started to contribute finance, started to contribute fighters. You know, there was a call for military veterans in Nigeria that wanted to fight in Ukraine. And a lot of people volunteered, you know, and later the government came to speak against it, that they are not in favor of volunteering to go to war, that it becomes a mercenary action. So you can see that Ukraine has been able to gain a lot of favor from the global perspective. And if I will agree with myself, I will see that so far it has worked for the favor of Ukraine, because if other countries that are not members of NATO and want to belong to NATO to protect themselves, they have seen the disadvantages as perceived. And it's going to give them a lot of stress to fight all of the other nations all together as one.
Well, we hear today Western military sources saying that President Putin is now directly involved in the day-to-day running of the war, taking decisions, you know, normally made by junior officers. What do you make of this? Does he have a personal interest, or is this perhaps just evidence that Moscow's campaign is perhaps not going according to plan?
For Putin's activities in this crisis, I would like to say it's going to be a disadvantage to Russia, because, you know, if you look back, Putin has been penciled out as one of the most richest leaders in the world, you know, and holding such resources, he must have bought into personal interest that he wants to protect. My take on that. And also, I begin to see that his earlier activities was not in direct conflict, but in intelligence gathering and espionage. So if it's time for conflict, he will need the trust and the confidence of the generals and the troops to actually go out and motivate others to fight. So if you look at Putin's activities, you will see a lot of personal interest protection and other business angles that we have not been able to see ordinarily will be playing out for putting that pressure on him to squash Ukraine and make a name concerning it.
Let's look at what we've seen in the last couple of hours. Shelling ongoing with missile strikes in Sumy, Lviv. But Russia says Ukraine shelled Donetsk residential areas. This is from the Russian-backed administration of the so-called Donetsk Republic. They said that Ukrainian troops twice shelled a residential area in the district. But the Kremlin has maintained that, it was never in the plan, and this is its plan to attack civilians. He said they keep maintaining that civilians were never attacked and that civilians are not dying in the hands of Russian soldiers. Who's telling the truth in these kinds of circumstances?
Well, that's part of the campaign I told you about on the media, that you'll be getting different kinds of reports. Now, if you look at Ukraine itself, during the onset of this war, the Ukrainians have disabled most of their GPS, and the Russians don't have the total cooperation of their intel. So it's difficult to know where there are civilians right now and where there are fighting troops, because people have taken refuge to hide from the onslaught of the military and to be in safe zones. So if they are saying they are not attacking civilians, I've seen videos of such stories being portrayed, and I'm sure the International Criminal Law and the War Crimes Committee of the UN, they will be taking notes to actually be able to provide a judicial process after the war. But I'm sure that with the kind of equipment that are being deployed, the Russians would have opportunity to attack where civilians actually hide from the war.
Indeed, very interesting. A final question to you, briefly, if you can answer that. Who do you think is winning the war as it stands now?
I didn't get that, please.
Who would you say is winning the war?
Well, the war is not the battle. As per my experience contains, the war is a continuum. And you know that the whole countries around Russia seem not to be in full favor except by coercion. And if you look at the financial war that is going on, if you look at the economic war that is going on concerning this Ukraine and Russia conflict, you will see that so many businessmen in Russia have been affected. The economy has been affected, though we have some other countries that are saying they want to buy Russian oil. But I think that is because they can trade it at a lower rate. But truly, I think Ukraine is at the forefront.
We appreciate your time, Ambassador Roy Okedebe, security analyst, member of security professional bodies. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You're watching Russia's invasion of Ukraine here on Channels Television. Still ahead, Japan signs a $100 million loan agreement with Ukraine. Welcome back. Japan has signed a 13 billion yen, that's $100 million loan agreement with Ukraine. The aid will be co-financed with the World Bank and incorporated into the Ukrainian government's budget. The Japan International Cooperation Agency said Ukraine will not use the funds for military purposes. Japan's welfare ministry also said that it will offer specialized job assistance services for Ukrainians who have fled to Japan since Russia's invasion. Starting this week in Tokyo and Osaka, Ukrainians will have access to free consultations on job hunting and requirements for obtaining residency. That's according to the ministry. The U.S. Senate has voted to advance $40 billion more of aid for Ukraine, setting the stage for a vote on the bill possibly later this week. The tally was 81-11 on the first of a potential 3 procedural votes, paving the way for the final Senate passage of the funding. All 11 no votes were from Republicans. The House of Representatives approved the aid on May the 10th, but it stalled in the Senate after Republican Senator Rand Paul refused to allow a quick vote. Biden's fellow Democrats narrowly control both the House and Senate, but Senate rules require unanimous consent to move quickly to a final vote on most legislation. Staying in the United States, President Joe Biden met with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C., and said they would discuss the ongoing support for Ukraine and also trade partnerships. Mitsotakis described the U.S.-Greek relationship at an all-time high and that the two countries were facing united the challenge of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. He added that the two would discuss energy security. Last week, Greece's parliament approved the renewal and amendment of a defense cooperation agreement with the United States. Mitsotakis told Parliament the agreement shields the country against military threats, will allow an upgrade of military facilities, and is a vote of confidence for Greece, which is becoming an energy hub in the region after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He said the agreement grows in importance against the backdrop of the war in Europe. Mitsotakis will address the U.S. Congress later.
The democratic ideals that we so cherish originated in Greece, as we all know, inspired by our founders who were students of Greece. Sadly, Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine is also about a threat to democracy from autocrats and want to bear down on rules-tested orders and rule-based orders. The friendship and partnership between our countries, between Greeks and Americans is, I think, more important than ever, and I'm honored to celebrate that partnership with you.
We fought in wars together, and of course we are now facing united the challenge of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. At the same time, this visit is an opportunity to reassess the status of our relationship. I honestly believe it is at an all-time high, and I'm not just speaking about the defense component of the relationship, but I'm also speaking about trade, investment, Greece's role as a reliable partner in the Eastern Mediterranean, as a country that overcame the financial crisis with a booming economy, and as a pillar of stability both in the Balkans and in the broader region. So when we talk about issues such as energy security, there's so much more we can do together, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you to discuss these important topics.
The Greek Prime Minister will be addressing U.S. Congress later today. Meanwhile, fuel sales have been suspended at hundreds of petrol stations in Russia, which belong to the oil giant Shell. Earlier, the company said it was withdrawing from Russia over its war in Ukraine. The Interfax news agency reports that announcements have appeared at Shell's pumps in Russia that are not selling fuel from the 15th of May. The agency quoted a Shell representative as saying that all fuel supplies have been suspended at stations covered by the deal with Lukoil, while shops and cafes remain open for now. And McDonald's has initiated a process to sell its business in Russia after 30 years of operating its restaurants in the country in the light of Moscow's war on Ukraine. The fast food operator said the humanitarian crisis caused by Russia's invasion and the unprecedented operating environment meant continuing operating in Russia was untenable as it was no longer consistent with McDonald's values. The company expects to record a non-cash charge of $1.2 billion to $1.4 billion dollars, that is, following the sale. Last year, it generated about 9% or $2 billion of its revenue from Russia and Ukraine. The world's largest burger chain had in March decided to close its 847 restaurants in the country, including the iconic Pushkin Square location in central Moscow. According to company executives, ever since McDonald's shut its stores in Russia, it has been losing roughly $55 million a month to pay staff, landlords and suppliers for its restaurants in Ukraine and also Russia. Muscovites have expressed both sadness and indifference following McDonald's Corporation exit from Russia, while some Muscovites were less worried, expressing hope that whatever eventually replaced the world-famous burger chain might have its own benefits. Some, however, thought it was a positive thing that the U.S. fast food chain had decided to leave. The world's largest burger chain, which owns about 84% of its nearly 850 restaurants in Russia, will take a related non-cash charge of up to $1.4 billion following its sale. Meanwhile, established during the Cold War, let's tell you a bit about NATO. It's a transatlantic security alliance composed of 30 member countries, including the United States. NATO has focused on deterring Russian aggression in recent years, but it has also conducted security operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and Somalia. Now, amid Russia's invasion this year, many NATO allies are providing Kyiv with extraordinary quantities of military supplies, and the alliance could expand to include Finland and Sweden. We're hearing the latest, of course, on those. But joining us to talk more about this, NATO and its expansion plans, and this is also as it pertains to the invasion of Ukraine, is the public affairs analyst, Lester Wilcox. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. We know you are on your way somewhere, but do be safe as you talk to us. But what's your take on the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, its military alliance? Are they moving too fast with their expansion?
Well, NATO expansion has been a topical issue for a long time. Since after the Cold War, yes, NATO wants to expand. With the collapse of the Soviet bloc that has the countries like Czechoslovakia, Poland, and other states that were within the Warsaw Pact, since the collapse of the Cold War and then the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, NATO has moved in to fill up the gap by getting more countries to join the alliance in order to have a better security for Europe. The latest being the fact that they wanted Ukraine to join, and of course, Ukraine is just next door to Russia. Now, this whole alliance, it's just for the security of Europe against Russia, because Russia is seen as a powerful and aggressive nation without sound democratic structure that could do anything, anytime within the confines of European security. So it's been on the table for a long time, and right now they have a better grounds to want to go ahead and do the expansion. Yes, this has been won by a lot of people. You remember during the time of Donald Trump was not interested in NATO's expansion, so he slowed down everything about NATO. But with the advent of Biden at the White House, that plan was activated, and that's what we are seeing happening today in Europe with the war in Ukraine by Russia. been that expansion.
Also talking about, you mentioned Donald Trump, I also do believe that he was insistent that, member states actually pay their percentage of the GDP for defense military spending. He wasn't happy that, very few states of the over 20-something states were indeed doing that. But then looking at Russia's response, which appears to be sort of backing down from its earlier rhetoric with Finland and Sweden's intention. What do you see in terms of President Putin? And, because this is all stemming from what he didn't want Ukraine doing, joining the EU, joining NATO. But then these other countries are going forward to do just that.
Well, countries like Sweden has been a non-aligned country all this while. They have a neutrality policy of not participating in any military alliance. They see themselves as just a country that just wants peace within their borders and with all their neighbors. So Sweden has never participated in any international peace, international conflict. I think Finland, same to Finland, but because of the happenings in Ukraine, countries are now beginning to reassess their security architecture and their security policy, because it is unheard of. Nobody in his right sense, maybe right as at this time last year, nobody would have expected that Russia will invade Ukraine, no matter the provocation. I mean, nobody will have expected it. And so those countries that borders Russia, Finland, Sweden, that borders Russia, now their fears that arrived, the fact that, one day, it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but one day, another Putin, maybe long after Putin must have left power, another Putin will wake up and then annex them. Remember the way Putin annexed Crimea? Russia annexed Crimea. Remember that now, because of, their reason for going into Ukraine, not even minding that it is NATO, because of NATO's membership by Ukraine, but the Donbas region, thinking that they want to liberate the Donbas region. Now, when a country consistently have aggression to its neighbor, a powerful neighbor as such, Ukraine is not a small country, a powerful neighbor as such, then what are the smaller countries? Why would their affairs not be ripe? And the clause in NATO being that an attack on one is an attack on all, gives them more security. So, having this policy of neutrality by Sweden is no longer feasible, because in the light of prevailing circumstances, that one day somebody can wake up in Russia, somebody can wake up in Belarus, somebody can wake up elsewhere and attack a country without any form of whatever form of provocation they can talk about. So it's like the Russia playing to the house of the West, or playing to the house of NATO, to actually actualize their expansion. Before now, countries like Estonia, countries like the countries in the Baltic region, they've all joined. The moment the Russian Federation collapsed, they joined NATO immediately for their own security. But because countries like Ukraine had already had a pact with Russia to give up their nuclear capabilities in exchange of non-aggression, a non-aggression pact, to give up their nuclear capabilities, in guarantee that Russia will not attack them. But of course, that agreement didn't work. Russia has attacked Ukraine, and if not for the resistance of the Ukrainians, if not for the West supporting Ukraine, by now Ukraine will have been history. So those other states now, Finland and Sweden, that shares long border with Russia, they've only, Russia has only played into the hands of NATO by making those people to rethink their security and for them to join NATO.
Indeed, and also, with the US, UK signing some sort of guarantees for both countries militarily, that also gives them a lot of boost. But finally, Lithuanian president sees the war in Ukraine to be won on the battlefield. Is this what you also agree with?
No war is won on the battlefield and remains circumstance. No matter the battlefield victory, there is still the negotiation parts to the war, because right now Russia is finding it difficult to achieve their military objective. Yes, they must have gone overboard in terms of whatever military strategy they've had. The stories coming out of Russia, I'm not blaming Russia entirely for the atrocities, because also the Ukrainians will also have share in the blame. But Russia is not getting their military objective achieved within the shortest period of time they wanted it to have achieved. As a matter of fact, Russia would have expected that this war should not last more than 3 weeks, a month maximum, because they were already close to Kiev and before all the resistance came in. So even if the war, you get some military victory at the war front, but you still need to have negotiations at the CB negotiation table. So the war cannot be won at the war front. Even if Russia loses and eventually withdraw, there will still be room for negotiation, diplomatic negotiations at the negotiation table. So no war is won totally at the war front. There must be that window of diplomatic resolutions to clear up all the areas and all the nitty-gritties. But the fact is, right now, Russia is finding it difficult to swallow this pride and to make a retreat. Of course, that will not happen except with some form of rapprochement. And the only people that can bring that rapprochement, as I see it now, is China. Because China has either remained aloof or remained, or because not knowing where to pitch that tent. But if China should start up some diplomatic effort on both parties, both Ukraine and looking at Russia's concern. Yes, I know that Russians have a legitimate concern with respect to their own security. I mean, if Ukraine is part of NATO and Ukraine as a country, and you have the Western arsenal, nuclear powers being stationed just next door to Russia, of course, nobody will take that lying low. So Russia has a lot of concern, genuine concern, which needs to be addressed so that this whole thing will just have a way, but it cannot end at the battlefield. It must go to the negotiation table for that to be a diplomatic settlement to the issues.
Thank you, Mr. Alex Wilcox, public affairs analyst. It was a pleasure having you join us on the program.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. It's always my pleasure. Thank you anytime. Yeah, thank you. It's always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we now move to the business side of things. Joining us in the studio is Eni John Mekwa.
Hi, Millicent.
Welcome.
Thank you.
In Russia, they say some people are indifferent, some people are sad. McDonald's is going, but they're saying they're not making so much money as before.
Yes, they are not. And, well, the thing is they had already closed in March, you know, when the war just started and corporates wanted to show solidarity with Ukraine.
I think McDonald's even stalled because they had to call them out before, you know, they pulled out from Russia.
Yeah, yes, they did. But I know that they did shut down in March, you know, just that maybe they still had some skeletal stuff and they didn't sell off their stores or their facilities. So that's what they're doing now, selling it off to local investors or people who are interested locally. So, and they say that this is it, at least from what they have said. Even if the war were to end, sentiment would not be the same, so that they will not come back or do business in Russia. So that's what this is about. And it's been 30 years. So you can imagine what has happened to the taste board of Russians and what they'll be going through now. It's actually a culture shock, kind of, for a lot of residents in Russia, not just Russians now, people who live there, like the guy you spoke to yesterday, because they've been used to all of this Western world for technology. I know the other time we talked about the issue of social media, you know, those ones have also left, and also with the human resources, the skills that come with that, you know. So it's a rude shock for a lot of residents in Russia. They have to start looking for alternatives to Instagram, you know, to McDonald's, and, you know, to a lot of Western companies that have been there for decades and have become like a part of what they know. So I just imagine how the stores, you know, if you go to a high street in Russia, how it would look like at this time. I'm sure it will have a very different picture.
Possibly empty as well. Well, we're also saying that this, you know, invasion has affected, you know, EU slashing growth forecast from 4% to 2.7%.
2.7, yes. You know that, of course, every economy depends on power. Gas, electricity, water, it's power for manufacturing, power for living, power for warmth. And Russia's gas imports about 40% of the gas that European countries use. So no power, especially a sudden cut. We've talked about the issue of recession. The UK is really close to getting into recession now. The US, the same thing. And if there were to be a sudden cut of gas from Russia to a lot of European countries, especially countries like Germany, there would be a sharp recession. So obviously growth is not the same. Growth forecast cannot be the same because supply chain has been disrupted. A lot of the commodities, a lot of the semiconductors. Before the pandemic, you don't forget, we still have the pandemic. You know, the world hasn't gotten out of that.
Yes.
So we had that semiconductors disruption supply that was hitting a lot of manufacturing. We're talking about electric vehicles. A lot of them cannot move on. We're talking of fertilizer. A lot of them cannot move on. A lot of those companies, you know, that connected, that they cannot produce, they cannot supply. The Black Sea is blocked. You know, goods and commodities cannot move. Services are even disrupted.
Can't we have an African solution to this? Africa replacing Europe's gas supplies.
You know, we've talked about this so much. Believe it or not, Russia has the biggest gas reserve in the world. Now, Africa also has a large proportion. And guess what? Nigeria has the largest reserve in Africa, about 600 trillion cubits of gas. But guess what? They're just reserved. They have not been tapped. They have not been produced. They have not been worked on. And the worst case scenario, we do not have the infrastructure. You know, we have a lot of pipeline projects or projects in the pipeline. You know what I'm saying here in Nigeria, so it's in the pipeline. You know, we have a lot of pipeline projects that have been in the books for years. But how do we get this thing out? Algeria seems to be the most developed when it comes to pipeline infrastructure to get the gas from Nigeria to Europe. You know, so it's supposed to go through Morocco. We do have a pipeline project that's supposed to go through from Nigeria through Morocco to Europe, but it's not developed.
So it will take us money, it will take us time.
Exactly. So even if we started working on it right now, we can hardly tap into this.
And we want the war to end quickly.
Yeah, we do want the war. And we do hope that we can get the lessons from the war. The world is talking about food insecurity now because of the war. Can we try to be self-sufficient? Can we look inwards? Can we develop our investment, our infrastructure, you know, to make the most and not just potentials and reserves?
Food for thought. Thank you, Nijan Makwa, for joining me. Coming up, Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra sings Eurovision song to border guards, returns home to enthusiastic welcome. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is opposed to Finland and Sweden joining NATO, and he's now said the two Nordic nations should not bother sending delegations to Turkey to try to persuade him. Erdogan has labelled Sweden a hatchery for terrorist organisations, claiming there are terrorists within parliament. Meanwhile, hundreds of people in the southern Turkish province of Adana have voiced their opposition to the military presence of the US-led NATO Atlantic Treaty Organisation near Incirlik air base. Here's more on this report from yesterday. The US Congress will seek to ratify Finland's application to join the Western military alliance, NATO, before going on holiday in August. US Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said in Helsinki today after meeting Finland's president. Senator McConnell said there was broad bipartisan support among US lawmakers for Finnish membership.
With regard to the news of today, I think I'm safe in saying there's strong bipartisan support in the United States for admission of Finland to the world's most successful military alliance. There's never been a more successful military alliance than NATO. Finland brings a lot to the alliance. Frankly, their participation strengthens the alliance significantly. And it's a great honor to happen to be here on the day when your request for admission is official. And let me say that the goal in the United States will be to approve that as rapidly as possible.
President Niinistö, who confirmed on Sunday that Finland would apply for NATO membership, said it was not only about the membership, but solving the crisis in Ukraine.
We had a very interesting discussion, not only dealing with Finnish membership in NATO, but also Ukraine and how we see world developing, getting better, how we get rid of these problems we have, the crisis in Ukraine. Very important issues, and once again, it's very valuable to have you here. Thank you.
Meanwhile, earlier, hundreds of people gathered near airbase in the southern Turkish province of Adana to voice their opposition to the military presence of the US-led North Atlantic Treaty Organization. About hundreds of meters away from the base, protesters were chanting slogans, holding banners reading, "Get out, NATO, this land is ours." Some protesters believe that NATO, being a military alliance, has led to massive numbers of bloodshed in the neighboring areas.
We are here to protest the NATO quarters in Incirlik. We're saying that it is the source of every manipulation, every vicious attack that has been done to the Turkish people and the surrounding countries. And they do not belong to it. Their manipulative interruptions are not welcome, and they are seen. We will not stop until they are banished from our lands.
According to Estonian foreign minister speaking on the sidelines of a NATO foreign ministers meeting in Berlin, she hopes for a quick solution to the dispute between Turkey, Finland and Sweden on the Nordic countries' NATO membership. She says the overall approach and atmosphere had been very supportive because those countries have been long-time partners of NATO.
The overall approach and atmosphere in our meetings here in Berlin have been very supportive because those countries have been long-time partners of NATO. We have exercised together in foreign missions. We have had defense cooperation with those countries, and they are long-established democracies, which really would strengthen also the security. Becoming a member, they would also help to strengthen the overall security of the transatlantic area.
Meanwhile, EU foreign ministers are seeking to publicly pressure Hungary to lift its veto on a proposed oil embargo on Russia, with Lithuania saying the bloc was being held hostage by one member state. The embargo proposed by the European Commission in early May would be the harshest sanction yet after Moscow's February 24 invasion of Ukraine, and includes carve-outs for EU states most dependent on Russian oil.
And now, unfortunately, we are the whole union is being held hostage by one member state who cannot help us find their consensus.
And we'll do our best in order to deblock the situation. I cannot ensure that this is going to happen because the positions are quite strong. But I think that if we understand the particular situations of some member states, and all of us make an effort in order to present a united front against Russia, we'll succeed.
But Hungary, Moscow's closest ally in the EU, has said it wants hundreds of millions of euros from the bloc to mitigate the cost of ditching Russian crude. The EU needs all 27 states to agree to the embargo for it to go ahead. And to sports now. Ministers are worried a £4.25 billion deal to sell by Chelsea may be at risk of falling apart due to a lack of consensus with the club over the proceeds of any sale. The BBC is reporting that according to a UK government insider, there is now alarm in Whitehall that the takeover of the European champions could be timed out if deadlines are not met. Chelsea have agreed terms on a deal with a private equity funded consortium led by US investor Todd Boehly. The club was put up for sale before owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned for his alleged links to Russian president following the invasion of Ukraine. The Believe it or not, the Ukrainian rap and folk band Kalush Orchestra, winners of the Eurovision Song Contest, performed their song Stefania on their journey back home yesterday. Border guards at the Poland-Ukraine border sang along with the group. The song in Ukrainian, the winning song, fused rap with traditional folk music. Kalush Orchestra were greeted at the border with Poland by servicemen and women whose cause the band had championed in Turin. Frontman Ole Tsuk was presented with a banquet of yellow and blue flowers, colors of the Ukrainian flag. He said the band is planning to sell the trophy to raise money and help Ukrainian armed forces. Happy moments. Well, that's it on our program. Of course, you can watch an update later at 5, of course, on our website or YouTube channel, channelstv.com for more updates. I'm Melissa Walker. Thank you for watching.